Hello and welcome to my channel, Christine Kersey Books. So I tried something new and I need your feedback. I tried using AI, artificial intelligence, to do narration on an audiobook. The Billionaire Handyman. This is actually one of my favorite books. I wrote it kind of recently and I based it on my husband, who's not a billionaire, but who's a handyman. And anyway, so I recorded the first chapter using AI, and I have that at the end of this video. And I tried using a couple different voices, a male voice for the point of view of the hero, and a female voice for the point of view of the heroine, and also a couple other voices with other characters that they interacted with. So just trying something different, and I want to get your feedback if you think that's something you like. If it's something you could not stand to listen to for hours, which I get it if that's how you feel. So if you have time, it's 8 or 9 minutes, and listen to that first chapter and give me some feedback in the comments if you hate it, if it's tolerable, if you like it. Anyway, just something different I'm trying, because one thing that's challenging with this book is within one chapter it'll have first the hero's point of view and then it'll go to the heroine's point of view. And if I'm doing the narration, I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit confusing. So using the AI voices where it's obviously a man's voice versus a woman's voice makes it clear whose point of view it's from. So just something I'm experimenting with. But anyway, if you want to listen to that, that would be great. You know, one thing that's really funny about this though, is that the books that I've narrated, from time to time, I'll get somebody commenting that I sound very robotic. If I sound like I'm an AI voice, maybe I should just use an AI voice. But in reality, I think I sound a little bit better than an AI voice. If you want to know what this book is about, I'll tell you. Or you can jump ahead in the chapters to the beginning of the book. After breaking up with her controlling ex, Aspen sells everything and moves into the mountain cottage she inherited from her grandmother. Overwhelmed by all the place needs to have done, she decides to hire a handyman. After his father suddenly passes away, billionaire Ethan has an epiphany. Though he's wealthier than he ever dreamed he would be, he's not happy. He sells his Los Angeles business and moves to a cabin in the woods, leaving everything he knows behind. It doesn't take long for him to get bored, so when an opportunity arises to work as a handyman, he jumps on it. Only trouble is, all he can think about is the woman who hired him. Too bad she has zero interest in kindling a romantic relationship. So it's just a fun romance. And anyway, listen to that first chapter and let me know what you think.
Chapter 1. Ethan sat back and watched as his friends Luke and Kate exchanged marriage vows. When he thought about the way they'd met, Ethan had to suppress a chuckle. Luke had finally told him that he'd created a fake profile on a dating app. Maybe I should do something like that, he thought, but immediately discarded the idea. That wasn't his style. Besides, what were the odds he'd find someone as charming and wonderful as Kate? Not high. Instead of thinking about his pitiful love life, he focused on the lovely ceremony, basking in the reflected joy that was so clear on the faces of Luke and Kate. All through the reception, which included an amazing 4-course meal, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the new adventure he was about to embark upon. It was something he'd been thinking about for a while. Ever since his father had passed away unexpectedly several months earlier. Throughout Ethan's growing up years, and to be honest, even as an adult, his father had always made an effort to let Ethan know what was most important. Relationships with those you love. Family ties. Basically, things money couldn't buy. After his father's death, Ethan had taken that to heart and had realized that the oft-repeated phrase, "money can't buy happiness," was actually true. So, he'd sold his extremely lucrative business and was now walking completely away from the life he'd known, the life he'd built for himself. If he wasn't only 31, he might have called it a midlife crisis. But no, that's not what it was. He'd had an epiphany that although he was wealthy beyond what he'd ever dreamed of, he wasn't happy. Now he was doing something about it. A while later, as Ethan watched couples moving around the dance floor, Luke came up to him and said,
"So glad you could come."
Luke and Kate had already taken their first dance and now they were mingling with their guests. I wouldn't miss it, Ethan said with a warm smile. Luke chuckled.
Just glad it didn't interfere with you moving into seclusion.
That brought a loud laugh from Ethan. Sounds like you think I'm going to be a hermit. Luke's eyebrows rose.
Aren't you though? All alone in that cabin in the middle of nowhere?
Shaking his head, Ethan couldn't stop his grin. He was eager to get to the modest cabin he'd purchased in Cedar Park, California, and eager to take on DIY projects. Growing up, he'd helped his father on many projects around their house and felt rather confident in his handyman skills. He'd find out soon enough if his confidence was well placed or a colossal overestimation of his skill set. The town proper is only a few miles away, Ethan said in reply to Luke's comment. Hardly in the middle of nowhere.
Whatever you say.
Luke gave Ethan a hearty pat on the back as a smirk tugged up one side of his mouth.
When you get tired of nothing to do and no one around, you're welcome to come stay at my place.
Luke looked toward Kate, who was visiting with other guests. Love filled his eyes.
I guess I should say our place.
At the look of adoration on Luke's face, Ethan couldn't help but feel envious. Sure, he'd dated lots of women, but he'd never found the one. Well, he certainly wouldn't find her among the forests of the Sierra Nevadas. Anyway, that wasn't why he was going. Quite the contrary. He felt a deep need to get back to basics, to focus on something completely opposite of making money. To use his hands and his wits to solve different kinds of problems. Not the kinds of problems that led to making stacks of money, but things like, how to repair a clogged sink or a leaky roof. Or how to lay a new wood floor. Yeah. He was eager to get started on this adventure.
Are you sure about this?
Marcel asked Aspen. Aspen smiled at her best friend who stood in the doorway of Aspen's nearly empty bedroom, then tucked another t-shirt into her suitcase. She would miss seeing Marcel all the time, but it wasn't like they wouldn't be able to get together. After all, Sacramento was only 2 hours from the cottage Aspen was moving into up in the mountains. Yes, she said in reply. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Marcel tilted her head.
Well, I think you're crazy to sell everything and move up there all by yourself, but you do you.
Aspen laughed. You know I will. Anyway, I didn't sell everything. Some of my stuff is in storage.
You sold this condo.
Marcel's tone was filled with disbelief, her arms open to encompass the space where Aspen had lived for the last several years. Though she knew it seemed crazy, Aspen also knew that she had to go all in on this new venture. If she still owned her condo, it would give her an easy out, a way to give up and come back. No, this was the best way to proceed. She reached for the last item hanging in her closet, a pair of jeans, then paused and turned to face Marcel. I know it's going to be different, but I'm super excited about this. One side of Marcel's mouth quirked up.
Good thing you can work from anywhere, I guess. Otherwise, I would worry that you'd be destitute.
As an independent graphic designer, Aspen worked for herself doing contract work. She'd already made sure the cottage she'd inherited from her grandmother had decent Wi-Fi, so as far as she was concerned, she had everything she needed to get by. That, plus town was less than 15 minutes away, so she could get groceries and such without much difficulty. So yes, she would be fine. Wearing a grimace, Marcel asked.
What about wild animals?
That was something that had crossed Aspen's mind, but she was determined to not let anything discourage her from making this move. Not making eye contact with her best friend, Aspen took the jeans off of the hanger, then rolled them up and jammed them into a corner of her already full suitcase. What about them?
Aren't you, I don't know, worried that they'll get close to the cottage?
Yes, she definitely was. But her grandmother, who had used the cabin as a getaway in her younger days, had spent plenty of time there and had never been injured by an animal. I'm sure if I pay attention I'll be just fine, she said. Then she thought, I hope. She struggled to zip the overflowing suitcase closed, but managed to do it before turning to Marcel with a broad smile. Guess that's it. With raised eyebrows, Marcel stood.
All right.
A forced smile appeared on her lips.
Do you want me to start loading your stuff into your Jeep?
Yes, that would be great. Together, they loaded everything Aspen had packed. Now the condo was completely empty. Marcel crammed the last box into the Jeep.
I still can't believe you sold your condo.
Aspen shrugged. It's what I needed to do. Marcel faced her, her hands on her hips.
But what if you hate living in the mountains?
The comment irritated Aspen. It was as if Marcel believed Aspen would fail in this endeavor. Marcel's lack of confidence only strengthened Aspen's resolve. I'll make it work. Marcel frowned.
How close is your nearest neighbor going to be?
Her tone said, you're going to be all alone out in the wilderness. Alone with wild animals and who knows what else. Not about to validate Marcel's legitimate worries, Aspen shrugged. I'm not sure. Shaking her head, Marcel sighed, then gave Aspen a warm hug before stepping back and giving her a stern look.
I expect to hear from you frequently.
Aspen laughed. You remind me of my mother right now. Cupping a hip with her hand, Marcel frowned.
What does your mother think of this anyway?
The cottage belonged to her mother, Aspen began, and her mother taught her to love the outdoors, so she thinks it's great. At least, she mostly thought it was great. She had her reservations too, but she wasn't objecting to Aspen moving to the cottage. Not as strenuously as Marcel was.
Right.
Aspen glanced at her phone to check the time. I'd better get going. I'll have a lot to do once I get there.
At least it won't be too cold.
Marcel paused, her eyebrows rising.
Yet.
It's only May. I have months before it gets cold again. Marcel rolled her eyes.
Sure.
This only made Aspen laugh. Marcel was a sun worshipper, whereas Aspen didn't mind the cold. She gave Marcel a quick hug, then opened the door to her red Jeep and hopped inside. I'll text you when I get there, okay? Marcel nodded.
Drive safe.